I've worked night shifts in hospitals for over a decade, but nothing prepared me for Ward 13. Most of the time, psychiatric wards are quiet at night, just the hum of machines, the occasional muttered word from a patient, the rhythm of the fluorescent lights. But Ward 13 was different. I started my first night as a temp nurse in the hospital after a staff shortage. The ward had been closed for months due to renovations and understaffing, and I was told to cover it temporarily while the permanent night nurse was out. The moment I walked through those doors, I felt it, a heaviness that clung to your chest like walking underwater. Patients were few, but the staff warned me about one in particular. "You might not see him," Mark, the head nurse, said. "He doesn't exist on the records, but you'll know him if you do." I laughed nervously. Ghost stories in hospitals are normal. I had heard hundreds. But that night, things started to go wrong almost immediately. The first patient I checked on was Mr. Hawthorne, a middle-aged man with severe depression. Nothing unusual there, just a man lying awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling. I adjusted his blanket, checked the vitals, and moved on. The ward was silent except for the soft beeping of monitors. Then, I noticed a door at the far end of the corridor, a reinforced metal door labeled Ward 13, Restricted. I had passed it in the orientation tour, but I hadn't really paid attention. Something about it called to me. I could feel a subtle draft coming from underneath it, a faint smell of antiseptic mixed with something organic. Probably storage, I muttered to myself, walking past. The first oddity happened when I went to check the patient charts. My clipboard fell from my hands, spinning to the floor as though pushed by an invisible hand. I froze, listening. Nothing. I shrugged it off, blaming fatigue, and bent to pick it up. Then I heard it. A soft knock from the other side of Ward 13. Tap, tap, tap. Rhythmic, deliberate. I wasn't expecting anyone. All other doors were locked. My pulse quickened. "Hello?" I called softly, trying not to alarm the patients. No answer. Only the tapping continued. I followed it down the corridor toward the locked Ward 13 door. My hand hovered over the handle, and for a moment I considered calling Mark. But curiosity got the better of me. I needed to see. I tried the handle, locked. My pulse raced. Then I noticed something strange. Scratches on the door frame, fresh looking, like someone had been trying to get out. My stomach sank. The old hospital records had mentioned a fire years ago, a ward that was abandoned after a patient died under suspicious circumstances. Could this be it? I leaned closer and heard whispers, faint, indistinct at first, then clear enough to make my blood run cold. "Help! Him! Don't let him out!" I stumbled back, heart hammering. Was it hallucination, stress, fatigue? But the air around me felt charged, heavy. I backed away and tried to reassure myself. Hospitals are full of strange noises. You get used to them. Over the next few nights, things escalated. Objects would move on their own. Chairs sliding across the floor, charts flipping open, lights flickering. I began hearing footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate, even when I was alone. The other staff tried to reassure me, but I could see the unease in their eyes. Then, one night, I encountered him. I was doing my usual rounds when I noticed a shadow at the end of the hallway. A figure, pale, hunched, moving in the dark. I called out. No answer. As I approached, he vanished. My heart raced, but then I noticed the monitor next to the Ward 13 door. It had powered on. A figure was visible, sitting upright on a bed, staring straight into the camera. But the bed was empty when I checked in person. I started documenting everything in a small notebook, recording times, details, anything I noticed. The more I wrote, the more the occurrences became undeniable. There was a presence in Ward 13, and it wasn't just a trick of my imagination. One night, a patient screamed, a high-pitched guttural sound that echoed down the corridors. I ran to her room, only to find her calm, staring blankly at the wall. "He's here," she whispered. "He wants me to see him." From that moment, I realized this wasn't about hallucinations or stress. Someone, or something, in Ward 13 was real, but not recorded, not acknowledged. And the deeper I looked, the more I discovered inconsistencies in patient records, missing files, and stories that didn't match up. The hospital administration brushed it off as clerical errors. I didn't believe them. Night after night, I saw glimpses of him, pale, thin, always in the shadows, waiting. Sometimes I'd catch him in the reflection of a window, standing silently behind me, then gone when I turned. I began piecing together a horrifying possibility. A patient had been admitted unofficially, hidden away, perhaps for decades. The hospital staff had covered it up. And now, he was awake. The whispers, the footsteps, the moving objects. It was all him, watching, testing me, seeing if I would notice. I could feel his presence even when he wasn't visible. He was intelligent, calculating, patient, and he wanted something. I spent the next few nights trying to understand him, reading old logs, talking to retired staff, even sneaking into the archives. The further I dug, the darker the story became. Ward 13 wasn't just a ward. It was a place to hide something too dangerous, too unexplainable for the outside world. One night, as I entered the corridor, the lights went out completely. My flashlight flickered, then died. And in the pitch black, I felt a hand brush against my shoulder. I froze. The whispers returned, louder, almost urgent. "Don't leave. Stay with us." I ran, stumbling down the hall, heart hammering, but the corridor seemed endless, twisting, changing. Doors that hadn't been there before lined the hallway. I reached for one, opened it, and found myself staring at a room full of patients, all staring blankly at me, faces pale, eyes wide, silent. At the far end, he sat, smiling faintly. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice calm, measured, almost gentle, but it was full of menace. And then I woke up, not in the hospital, not in the ward, back in my apartment, drenched in sweat, my notebook lying on the floor. But the scribbles had changed. Words I hadn't written appeared. "You saw me. Now you belong." At first, I thought it was a dream, one of those terrifying, vivid nightmares. But the notebook was real, the words unmistakable. And deep down, I knew it wasn't over. That night, I returned to Ward 13. I couldn't explain why. Part of me wanted to run. Part of me felt drawn, almost compelled. The hospital was quiet. The usual hum of machinery softened under the darkness. But the air felt charged, heavy, almost alive. As I stepped into the ward, the lights flickered. I saw him again, the hidden patient. He was standing in the corner, pale, thin, his eyes fixed on me. But this time he didn't vanish when I approached. He just watched, and I could feel intelligence behind his gaze, something calculating. I tried to speak. "Who are you? Why are you here?" He tilted his head. "I was never admitted, never counted, never acknowledged, but now you see me." The temperature dropped. My breath fogged in the fluorescent light. I realized he wasn't just a person. He was the accumulation of every secret the hospital had buried, every patient forgotten, every life ignored. And now he had me. The whispers returned, overlapping, urgent. "Stay. Stay. See us." I backed toward the exit, but the corridor stretched endlessly. The doors I knew weren't there before appeared. I turned one handle and found myself inside a room I didn't recognize. The walls were lined with faces of patients, all pale, all silent, all staring. In the center, he sat on a chair, calm, almost inviting. I realized then that Ward 13 wasn't just a place. It was a trap, a repository of everything the hospital had hidden. Patients who never officially existed, treatments that shouldn't have been, lives erased from records. And he was the embodiment of it all. I tried to leave, but the door slammed shut. The whispers turned into voices, dozens of them, layered, urgent, pleading. "Stay, see, remember." My mind raced. Then I remembered the old logbooks I had seen, the missing records. I started to read aloud from the notebooks, recounting the names of the forgotten patients, acknowledging their existence. The room trembled, the air thickened, and for the first time, I felt a shift. The hidden patient moved closer, his form solidifying. "You understand now," he said. "You see us. You remember." I nodded, voice shaking, and continued to read, calling out every name, every forgotten story. Slowly, the whispers softened. The pressure in the air eased. The faces on the walls seemed to exhale, and the hidden patient smiled. The door behind me creaked open. The corridor was normal again, the ward quiet. I stumbled out exhausted, shaken, but alive. Ward 13 was still, but the weight of its secrets had been lifted. Partially. I knew he would always exist there, somewhere between the shadows and the records. But acknowledging him had made a difference. I never returned to night shifts in Ward 13. The hospital administration never asked questions, and I never mentioned the hidden patient again. But I carry it with me. The memory, the whispers, the faces of the forgotten. Sometimes, in old hospitals or empty corridors, I feel a cold presence just behind me, waiting for someone else to see, someone else to acknowledge the truth. And I know deep down that Ward 13 never truly closes. It waits. Always. When I first inherited the townhouse on West Bridge Street, I thought I'd stumbled onto a lucky break. It was an old Victorian-style building tucked away on a narrow street in the city. The kind of place that looks charming in photographs but carries a sense of history you can feel in your bones the moment you walk inside. I had never met my great-uncle, the previous owner, and he had died decades ago, leaving the house to me as a distant relative he had never really known. The first time I set foot inside, I was struck by the silence. Not the kind of silence that comes from a closed room, but a deep, pervasive quiet, like the building itself was holding its breath. Dust hung in the air, illuminated by shafts of late afternoon sun through the tall windows. The floors creaked under my feet, the walls groaned with the weight of their years, and the smell of old wood mixed with something faintly metallic made my stomach twist. I spent the first few hours just exploring. Each room had its own character, the parlor with faded wallpaper, the kitchen with cabinets still lined with glass jars my great-uncle had once used, and the bedrooms with thin, threadbare carpets. The attic staircase caught my attention immediately. It was narrow, steep, and partially hidden behind a false wall that someone had painstakingly built into the corner. When I finally climbed into the attic, I discovered it was mostly empty, except for one door, old and locked, with no key in sight. The wood was worn, and the lock itself seemed almost ceremonial, large and rusty, as if no one had tried to open it in decades. I tried everything, finding hidden keys, prying with tools, but it wouldn't budge. And the more I stared at it, the more I felt a strange pull, a need to know what was behind it. That night, after setting up a temporary bed in the parlor, I started hearing things. At first it was small, a tap-tap sound above me, like someone walking on the attic floorboards. I told myself it was the house settling, old wood expanding and contracting. But then came the whispers, faint, indistinct, almost like someone speaking from far away. I froze in bed, straining to catch the words. There were names, a child's voice, an adult's voice, overlapping, urgent. My heart pounded, and I told myself it was imagination. The next morning I explored again, focusing on the attic. I found scrawled writing near the baseboards, faded but legible. "Do not open. Do not let them out." My stomach sank. Who were they, and why would anyone leave a warning like that? The handwriting was familiar somehow, rounded, meticulous, deliberate, but I couldn't place it. Over the following days, the strange occurrences increased. Objects would be moved from where I left them. Doors that I had closed would be open in the morning, and faint knocks would echo from the walls, always in the quietest moments. One afternoon, I noticed something odd in the mirror of the hallway. A shadow, tall and thin, lingering just behind me when I turned, gone when I spun around. Neighbors acted strangely too. One elderly man on the street warned me, his voice trembling. "That house? It has a history. Some rooms are meant to be left alone." I asked him about the attic, about the locked door, but he refused to answer. "Some things are better forgotten," he said. Believe me, despite all the warnings, my curiosity got the better of me. I began to research the house's history. City records, old newspapers, even diaries stored in the municipal archives painted a disturbing picture. My great-uncle had lived a reclusive life, largely shunned by the community. He inherited the house from his father, who had vanished under mysterious circumstances. Several others connected to the house had died young, disappeared, or simply stopped being heard from. Patterns emerged, particularly regarding the attic. Everyone avoided it, even those who lived there for years. One evening, a week after moving in, I decided I had to face the attic directly. I spent hours searching for tools, trying to find a way to open the locked door without breaking it. When I finally forced it open, the hinges groaned like a scream. The smell hit me immediately, damp, moldy, but beneath it, something else. Something decayed, long dead, but not unpleasant in a horrifying way. The room was small, almost like a hidden chamber. Dust covered every surface, but the floor was clear in the center, as though someone, or something, had walked there recently. On the walls were drawings, hundreds of them, scratched into the plaster, faces, people in strange positions, some twisted, some serene. At first I thought they were my great-uncle's sketches, but the more I looked, the less human they seemed. There were eyes staring at me from every angle, shapes that weren't quite right, patterns that made my stomach churn. In the center of the room was a box, similar to one my grandmother had once shown me in a dream, old and carved with intricate symbols I didn't recognize. I hesitated, hand hovering over it. The whispers grew louder, clearer, overlapping. "Lucas, open. We need..." My name. They were calling my name. I opened the box. Inside were dozens of letters, bound together with ribbons, all written decades ago. They spoke of a family secret, tragedies kept hidden, and a spirit trapped in the room for generations. It spoke directly to me, warning me, pleading with me to finish what no one else had. And suddenly, I realized why the house had felt alive. It wasn't just the structure, it was the presence, the people trapped inside. They had been waiting for someone to acknowledge them, someone to give them closure. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the room, reading the letters, piecing together the story. The more I read, the more I understood the scope of what had been kept hidden and why everyone in town avoided the house. There was a rhythm to it, a pattern to the voices, a logic to the disturbances, and I knew that the longer I stayed, the more I became part of it. By morning, I had a plan. I would finish the ritual described in the letters, not knowing what it would demand, not knowing if I could survive it. But I had no choice. The house had claimed my attention, my focus, my fear, and now it demanded my action. And as I descended the attic stairs, the whispers fell silent. But a single voice remained, clear and insistent, echoing through the quiet house. "Lucas, it's your turn." The moment I stepped off the attic stairs, the air changed. It was heavier, almost thick enough to taste. The house had gone quiet, but not the comforting quiet of a still room. It was a tense, expectant quiet, as if it was holding its breath and waiting for me to act. My flashlight flickered, then steadied, casting long, trembling shadows across the walls. I felt it immediately, the presence of the trapped ones. I could almost sense them moving around the room, watching, waiting. I forced myself to focus. The letters I had read the night before outlined everything I needed to do. The spirits weren't violent. They were lost, confused, desperate. My great-uncle had been the last person to attempt the ritual, but he hadn't completed it. The letters were explicit. I needed to acknowledge each trapped spirit by name, recognize them, and speak their stories aloud. Only then would they be free, and only then would the house release its hold on me. I started with the first set of letters. The voices began softly at first, almost like a sigh in the background. "Lucas, remember," they whispered. I spoke the names aloud, reading the stories, telling the tales of the lives lost within these walls. The room seemed to shift as I did, shadows stretching and retracting as if listening. My voice shook, but I pressed on. Each letter revealed tragedies, heartbreak, neglect, and fear. and with each one the air felt a fraction lighter, the weight on my chest easing. Then came a sudden cold, sharper than anything I had felt before. A shadow moved in the corner of the room, tall and thin but not threatening, more expectant. I realized it was waiting for me to acknowledge it. I hesitated, then whispered the name I found in the final letter, Eleanor, the voice of a young woman who had died in the house decades ago. As I spoke, the shadow seemed to soften, its edges blurring, and I felt a strange sense of relief ripple through the room. One spirit released, one step closer to completing the ritual. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had lost its meaning. I moved through the room, reading, speaking, acknowledging. Some spirits whispered, some cried, some seemed to simply breathe as I recognized them. The house groaned occasionally, reacting to my actions. It felt alive, yes, but it was no longer hostile. It was participating, guiding me to set things right. At one point, I stumbled upon a small box hidden beneath the floorboards. Inside were personal items: a child's toy, a lock of hair, a photograph of a family smiling in better times. I understood instantly. These were the items tied to the spirit's memories, their connections to the world. I held each item, described it aloud, told the story of the person it belonged to. The whispers turned into soft sighs of gratitude. I was no longer just a visitor. I was a participant, helping the house heal. The final letters were different. My great-uncle had written them in desperation, almost pleading. He spoke of a presence at the heart of the house, the oldest spirit, the one who had started all the disturbances, a man named Henry, the original builder. His voice was stronger, commanding, yet sorrowful. I had to face him to complete the ritual. I followed the letter's instructions to the deepest corner of the attic near the old chimney. I could feel the temperature drop dramatically as I approached. The air seemed to hum. Then I saw him, a figure, faint and spectral, but solid enough to be frightening. His eyes met mine, not with malice, but with anguish. I spoke his name, recounting the tragedies he had caused, the lives affected by his actions, and the regrets he had never faced in life. For a moment, nothing happened. The house was silent again. Then slowly the shadows softened. The air grew warmer, and the presence that had filled the attic began to dissipate. Henry's figure shimmered, then slowly dissolved into the air, leaving behind an almost tangible sense of peace. The whispers vanished. The tension lifted. The house exhaled, as if it had been holding decades of sorrow and was finally free. I sat there for a long time, catching my breath, staring at the now empty room. The glow of the morning sun crept through the attic window. Everything looked ordinary, almost mundane. But I knew better. The house had changed, and I had changed along with it. It had shared its burden with me, trusted me to set things right. I spent the next few days cleaning, cataloging the letters, and restoring the house. It was still old, still dusty, but it no longer felt oppressive. No footsteps, no whispers, no shadows following me. The house was silent, truly silent for the first time in decades. When I finally left the house, I felt a profound sense of closure. I had completed what my great-uncle could not. I had freed the spirits, and the house had finally been allowed to rest. I looked back one last time at the Victorian townhouse on Westbridge Street. The windows reflected the sunlight, the walls gleamed faintly, and for the first time, I felt that the house was not only alive, but content. Years later, when I think about the house, I don't feel fear. I feel gratitude. Gratitude for being chosen, for being able to bring peace to the forgotten souls trapped within those walls. The house taught me that even the darkest places can find resolution, and that acknowledgement, understanding, and courage can lift the heaviest of burdens. And sometimes, when I walk past an old building or hear a creak in the floorboards of a new home, I remember the whispers, not in fear, but as a reminder that every place, every person has a story that deserves to be heard.